Michigan Out of Doors Online is brought to you in part by Tri-County Logging. Experienced in sustainable forestry practices, Tri-County Logging can help you manage your property by keeping your woods healthy and generate income. Serving southern and mid-Michigan for nearly 50 years, TriCountyLogging.com. Hey everybody, welcome to Michigan Out of Doors. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We have a brand new show, but we're going to do something just a little bit different on this week's episode. Now, we've not been able to sit down and do a face-to-face interview with the DNR really for quite some time, and so that's what we're going to do on this week's show. We're going to sit down with Chad Stewart, the big game specialist for the DNR, talk about antler point restrictions, baiting, deer hunting numbers, hunter numbers, all the hot topics. You won't want to miss this week's show. Lots of good information. That's going to take up the bulk of this week's show, but we are going to have time for a bragging board as well. Lots of good stuff on this week's episode. You stay tuned. I'm Jimmy Gretzinger. It's time for Michigan Out of Doors.
From the first spring rains to the soft summer breeze, dancing on the pine forest floor, the autumn colors catch your eyes. Here come the crystal winter skies. It's Michigan, Michigan Out of Doors.
What a beautiful day in the woods.
Someday our children all will see this is their finest legacy, the wonder and the love of Michigan. As the wind comes whispering through the trees, the sweet smell of nature's in the air. From the Great Lakes to the quiet stream, shining like a sportsman's dream, it's a love of Michigan we all share.
Michigan Out of Doors is presented by Country Smokehouse, a sportsman's meat processor and Michigan destination since 1988, offers a variety of homemade smoked meats and Michigan-made products in-store and online. The Country Smokehouse features an outdoor barbecue and bar. Details at countrysmokehouse.com. By RBM Jigs, a Michigan-based company serving ice fishing anglers around the state and throughout the country. Specializing in ice fishing gear, RBM Jigs manufactures tungsten jigs, soft plastics, and much more. Online at lakeeffectlures.com. By Polar Craft Boats, offering riveted and welded boats for the outdoor enthusiast. Whether you're targeting fish or waterfowl, Polar Craft Boats have several models to choose from that keep you high and dry. For more information, polarcraft.com. By AnglerQuest Pontoons. AnglerQuest is a Michigan-based company building boats designed for comfort and fishing functionality. For more information, anglerquestpontoons.com.
Well, everybody, we are here today with Chad Stewart, the big game specialist for the DNR. We've been trying to do this now for, well, I think since season. We've had a few things happen with COVID. Let's just start with that. Chad, what has COVID done for the DNR? What does this past year look like for you guys?
It's been an interesting year, I'm not gonna lie. Many of us have been working from home, so all of our meetings have gone virtual now. We've been having everything through either conference calls or various, across computer platforms. To staff's credit, we've done a lot of work. It may have slowed us down. It's really caused us to adapt and think differently in how we do things, but in some ways it's connected staff that are really spread out across the state. When you factor from all over the UP to Southern Michigan, we've, talked about how we have engaged with our public a little bit more. So we've been able to hold a lot more, sort of public meetings through these virtual platforms, engage with stakeholders that previously would allow them, or they would be forced to go, several hours driving to get there. So we're adapting, and I think, long term it's going to be beneficial to explore some of these new technologies that we've not been able to incorporate in our day-to-day, but it has been a challenge, and I think most of us would like to see things get back to normal, but certainly understand the circumstances that we're faced with.
Yeah, well, and I have more questions about check stations and some of that kind of stuff, but when it came, you're kind of the deer guru, kind of the main person for talking about deer. Just kind of give me an overview of this past season. I don't know if you have exact numbers, but was the kill up, down, sideways? Kind of just walk me through this past deer season.
Yeah, that's what everybody wants to know, especially in January. And unfortunately, I don't have really good numbers for you. I can give you my impression for what it's worth. There's not a lot of science based behind that impression, other than a lot of conversations that help you try to piece things together. But as you know, and as maybe some of the viewers know, the way we generate our harvest estimates is through a postseason survey. And what's great about that is it provides an estimate, and it provides, scientifically credible boundaries associated with that estimate. So we know how much confidence we have in that estimate. The downside of that survey is that it takes months to complete, between mailing, getting feedback from hunters, doing multiple mailings, data entry, analysis, etc. So we typically don't have our harvest estimates until, May, maybe even June. And that's frustrating for a lot of people. I know it's frustrating for me, and certainly we can talk about maybe some changes that are on the horizon.
Well, that leads me right into the, we look at Indiana, Ohio, many other Midwestern states, some out west states, you have to call in your kill, which seems like a kind of a no-brainer. Why, if our system, I'm assuming it, if you just trust the math, let's say that it's accurate and you get it in June, if these other states are doing something different, why don't we just do it that way? Yeah,
and we get that a lot, and we're actually moving in that direction. So, as soon as this coming year, 2021, we do anticipate an online registration, piece, becoming available. I don't think it will not be mandatory to start with. It'll be voluntary. The plus side of that is that hunters can sort of test drive it, provide feedback, and then when we continue to move forward, and right now the plan is to have mandatory registration beginning in 2022, then we'll be able to incorporate that sort of test drive period that we're talking about this year, incorporate hunters' feedback, see what works, what doesn't work, and tweak the system so it's ready to roll for 22. One thing that was really interesting this year, and I think we're attributing it to sort of a COVID bump, is that our license sales are up about 5%.
Well, that's what, looking at some of the numbers I see online, I've seen anywhere from 5 to 15%, and I know we don't have, like you said, we won't have our actual kill numbers till maybe June or July, but I would assume that we have our number of licenses sold. So you say 5%, is that just deer were up 5% or hunting license in general?
That's individual deer license buyers. So the number of unique individuals that purchased a license was up about, I think it's like 5.4%. Okay. I think the actual number was around 616,000 individuals in Michigan purchased a license this year to hunt deer in Michigan. So that's encouraging, but you also want to look at this from a long-term perspective. It's still the third lowest license buying year that we've had since 2009. So we're up over 2019, we're up over 2018, but we're still down long-term.
So I'm sure there's been some conversations internally, I would imagine, so we get 5% or 10% or whatever, I don't know how many fishing licenses, what they're up, but how do we recapture those people? So let's say if we are at 5%, how do we get those people to make sure that they engage and buy a license next year?
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges I think that our marketing and outreach department is willing to take on. They want to try to capitalize and keep that momentum going. Knowing that sort of the age structure of our deer hunters is still stacked against us. We have a lot of hunters still in their 50s and 60s, and very few that are in their teens and 20s, and that's a trend that we don't see going away. So as you continue to look ahead, we still are anticipating a net loss in overall deer hunters. It's just, can we try to curb that loss as much as we can by trying to continue this momentum that we saw this year?
Okay. So shifting gears a little bit back to the COVID situation, it seems like, that's way up here, and CWD is like so far down the ladder. Is that even a thing anymore in Michigan? Do we even need to worry about it?
Well, we still have weekly, if not daily, discussions about chronic wasting disease. Okay. Yeah, things are not in the public eye like they have been in the past. Part of that is because we're now entering really year 6 of living with CWD in the state, in free-ranging deer at least. So we know that disease fatigue exists with our hunters. They want to hear something else, but at the same time, it still is important. The conversation has waned a little bit this year because, quite frankly, we have not tested the number of deer that we historically had. We obviously had some restrictions placed on us this year. Some of it was, because of those restrictions. Some of it was because the pace that we had set for ourselves back in 2017 and 2018 was unsustainable. Our agency is not equipped to continue to test 20 and 30,000 deer each year. It's above our resources. It's above our staff's capabilities.
So do you foresee us having these CWD zones like we had before, or is it something we can kind of get away from that, or just maybe talk a little bit about, you know, that?
Yeah, well, we started to actually get away from our CWD zones a little bit already, you know, whereas before we were carving out management units almost based on township, based on the previous detection of CWD. We've reverted back to, you know, traditional, you know, at least in the Lower Peninsula, county-wide deer management units. So when we talk about zones, it's more prioritizing surveillance, but there's really no regulatory impact associated with that. So, you know, right now, some of the areas of concern are southern Jackson County. We still would like to get more samples out of that area to really understand what the trend is down there. We know we're finding positives, but we need a better distribution. We need more animals to have confidence in that estimate. And then places like western Gratiot, and then anywhere sort of on the periphery of Montcalm County we're very interested in as well, because that seems to be the area that has had CWD probably the longest, because that's where the highest prevalence rate seems to occur.
Now, are we still going to have, I know there's a lot of confusion, and I used to know what the rules are, but it's so hard to keep track of. But so if I live in a CWD area and I shoot a deer there and I'm all contained there, great. But if I'm coming from another county and I'm hunting with a buddy and I get one, are we still gonna, is that always gonna be a thing that we got to worry about, or can we just, hey, if you shoot a deer, just take it home? Or just talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so that's a regulatory question. So we have walked back some of those restrictions previously. So when that carcass movement restriction was applied several years ago, the reason it was done so was because we knew we had a pocket of CWD in places like Montcalm and northeastern Kent County, but we hadn't really accomplished much surveillance around that. So we knew we had a pocket. We didn't know how big that pocket was. So much like, almost like a surgeon, we cut out a larger area around that pocket to try to encompass as much area and as much risk that would be associated with that pocket, given the uncertainty of that surveillance that had not been accomplished yet. Fortunately, we've done a lot of testing in some of those areas since then, and fortunately, that pocket that we identified in 2017 is, for better or worse, about the same size today. You know, and this is with a lot more information, a lot more deer being tested. So we actually walked back those restrictions. So counties that used to have that restriction, places like Mecosta and Newaygo and Jackson County and Ingham County, they don't have those restrictions anymore. Now, the restriction still applies in what we call, you know, sort of our core area, which is basically Montcalm County and the northeast corner of Kent, and just sort of an upper tier of Ionia County, some of those townships. There are still restrictions in place for hunters there, but we are also making it a little bit easier for them to take their deer even out of zone if they're going to a processor, if they're going to a taxidermist, because we know that those individuals generally are disposing of that waste material very responsibly.
Well, and I know there was some, shifting gears just a little bit, but off of that same idea, those zones, I know some of those CWD areas had antler point restrictions that were different from outside of there. We've got the northeast part, or the northwest part of the state that I believe is coming up close to, I think they're whatever it is, 5 or 6 year, to see if that's going to keep going. Where are we with antler point restrictions? Are we just going to, let's just do the whole lower? I mean, where are we at with that?
Yeah, so for the Northwest 12, and actually there's 13 counties up there because Leelanau has been in for quite a while. That was analyzed several years ago, and the decision was made with the support that hunters have shown for that, to remove what we call the sunset period. So we're no longer evaluating that on 5-year cycles. That is currently in, and we're not really evaluating that zone unless obviously something changes moving forward. But right now we have no plans to evaluate that zone.
Do you see that, is there any talks about just making that the whole zone 2, or the whole lower maybe, or? Not
at the moment, because as you previously mentioned, we're looking at antler point restrictions and in basically Mecosta, Montcalm, and Ionia counties. That was applied by our Natural Resource Commission several years ago, and we developed a study around those regulations to try to understand the impact of that regulation on different deer dynamics. So whether it's sex ratios, age structure, overall abundance of deer in those areas. We're trying to capture a lot of that information, specifically in select townships, using camera data, using volunteers in those areas, putting cameras out to really understand what the role of antler point restrictions is on the deer biology that we all find fascinating, with the intent of taking that information and plugging it into models that will help understand whether those changes associated with that regulation will potentially influence the spread or accumulation of chronic wasting disease in those areas.
So there's a lot of factors at play.
There's a lot of things going on. We are very interested, obviously, in seeing that study out, so we'd like to keep that regulation in place. Obviously, when you talk about regulations, the final decision comes up to the Natural Resources Commission.
Traveling in the northwest part of the state and talking to a lot of guys that were dead set against that APR, they have really loved having that. They start seeing some bigger bucks. It doesn't take much to change people's minds.
No, not at all, right? But we also recognize that there's a lot more to deer management than just big bucks. We are interested in disease, we're interested in total numbers, and all of these things have to be factored in, as well as just simply having bigger bucks, as well as obviously hunter support is important as well, but we have to take long-term looks at these things.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, because this always comes up every time we post something on any of our social media sites. The 1 buck rule. You can shoot whatever you want, no antler point restrictions, but you're only going to shoot 1 buck. Is that talked about much? Is this off the table?
No, I don't think it's off the table. We actually, on our survey that I alluded to earlier in the conversation, we actually have a question on that, trying to gauge baseline support for a 1 buck rule, the idea of it. And so we're going to look at the information that comes out of that survey this year and find out what the level of support, what the level of opposition is, and really look to see what those numbers are. And if it's obviously largely supported, that's something that I think we need to investigate further. And then the task becomes looking at the logistics behind incorporating a 1 buck rule.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and another hot topic, especially over the last couple of years, even with the COVID stuff, is baiting. We've now had 2 seasons. What has been your take or the department's take on? I'm sure that first year was. I know how many emails we got about it. I can't imagine how many you got about it. Has that been, was it about what you thought it would be? Are the numbers correlating with what you thought? Or just walk me through a little bit of where we are in the world of baiting right now.
Yeah, so everybody, that's one of the top questions that we always get. Is baiting going to return? And I will say that I do not foresee a recommendation from at least the DNR Wildlife Division coming forward with reinstituting baiting in the lower.
And the NRC could do it on their own, correct?
The NRC could do it on their own. Additionally, it could be tackled legislatively. I do not see that recommendation coming from the DNR. We've come down pretty solidly on that ground. There's certainly more information to be gathered on the overall impacts of baiting and influence of disease and spread. I think that's a topic we've identified that's worthy of further investigation, and I'm pretty confident that those answers will come out in a couple years from now. But we are really taking more of the approach towards like the precautionary principle, essentially, which is in the light of uncertainty and knowing that the influence of bait on movement of deer and the transmissibility of things like CWD and bovine tuberculosis, we want to try to reduce risk as much as possible with that spreading in our deer herd, and that's one of the factors that we've outlined in terms of our response.
And I know there's some, there always comes up, why, for this past year, the disabled hunt, they were able to use some bait. I think for the youth season, there was some controversy on whether they could bait, and I know a fair amount of them did. Why is there exceptions to that baiting rule?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think right now the answer is that if you're asking me, is those individuals putting bait out an increased risk, the answer is yes, clearly yes. When we only allow individuals with a qualifying disability in the Liberty and in the Independence hunt to put bait out, it's a very small number of individuals who participate in those hunts, and it's only for 6 days out of the year. And from a scale perspective, that's very different than allowing 500 to 600,000 deer hunters the opportunity to bait 90 days out of the year.
But you got to be able to see their perspective of like, why in the world can these guys do it and we can't?
Yep, absolutely. And the it's fair to him and it's not fair to me is completely an argument that we completely understand. The best way I can say it is I think, you know, that regulation in terms of the broader prohibition of baiting in the Lower Peninsula would not have been able to go through without some exceptions being made. And I know that that's certainly not fair to a lot of people, and I understand that and I recognize that, but again, from a responsibility standpoint in terms of trying to mitigate risk of disease transmission, we felt that those small sacrifices or those small exceptions were worth sort of the larger result.
Okay. Did we see much of a bump? I mean, it seems like there was a lot of the vocal people that were saying, hey, if I can't bait, I'm not going to hunt. And I know we don't have all the numbers for this year, but from last year to the year before, did we see a significant dip in hunters? Did we see a significant dip in the deer kill?
No. Actually, our total harvest last year went up a little bit compared to 2018. Last year being 2019 because we don't have 2020's information yet. Harvest went up. Hunter numbers went down, but hunter numbers went down proportionally to what we see happen even when we have bait. So,
so that's pretty. I mean, I wouldn't have suspected that would be the case at more, or even on par. I would have thought the kill would have dropped even more. But
so what we did see is, I think a lot of the harvest in 2019 was attributed to what we saw in the southern Lower Peninsula. We did see a drop in the northern Lower Peninsula, and that you can start to wrap your head around a little bit more. It's a lot, you know, there's a lot less edge up there. You know, you don't have nearly the amount of agriculture. You have, you know, much bigger woods. It makes sense that a bait pile would maybe bring deer a little bit more closely. So we did see the harvest drop a little bit in the northern Lower in 2019. That being said, we think that there are ways to try to circumvent that reduced kill by some of the regulation changes that we recently made to either bring it back up or at least on par with what we had before. So
okay, so the baiting thing is still an ongoing. It could be opened up, it might not be, but I mean, every year, I mean, even if you as the big game specialist said, hey, I want to have baiting, you can't just wave a wand and it starts. I mean, there's tons of steps.
I can't wave a wand and get anything, but no. So right now, we're not really having discussions internally about baiting. Absent new information coming out that forces us to restart those discussions, and right now that information is not available.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, and I know I'm kind of a glass half full kind of a guy, so even though we did see some uptick in hunter licenses, so let's just hope that we continue going that direction.
I'm with you, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Special thanks to Chad for spending some time with us. A lot of these topics are issues that won't be going away anytime soon. We'll keep you up to date as more and more information becomes available. Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching Michigan Out of Doors this week. If you missed part of this week's show or maybe last week's show, you can always check us out on our website as well as our social media platforms. You can do that, and we're also on YouTube. If you want to subscribe to our channel there, get an email every time we post something new. Lots of good stuff happening right now around the state of Michigan. Jenny and Jordan are currently on their way to the Upper Peninsula to get some stories up there. I'm going to be doing some ice fishing and checking out a custom ice rod builder here in the next few days. So lots of brand new stuff coming here on Michigan Out of Doors. If we don't see it in the woods or on the water, hopefully we'll see you right back here next week on your PBS station.
Michigan Out of Doors is presented by.
Do you dream of somewhere bigger than your backyard? You can get there with Greenstone. Whether you want to hunt, fish, hike, or just watch the sunset, we're ready to help you own your place in the great outdoors. To learn more, visit greenstonefcs.com.
By Showspan, producing sports shows such as the Ultimate Fishing Show Detroit at the Suburban Collection Showplace with new dates for 2021, now being held March 25th through 28th. The Ultimate Fishing Show is now in March.
Closed captioning provided by Marvo Mineral, makers of Lucky Buck, deer management products including minerals to supplement deer diets year-round to improve health and antler growth.
When I wander far away, a dream stays with me night and day. It's the road that leads to my home state. I am a Michigan man. Changing seasons paint the scene like rainbow trout in a hidden stream. The white-tailed deer in the tall pine trees. I am a Michigan man. I am a Michigan man. Ask where I'm from and I'll show you my hands. Lord above, I love this land. I am a Michigan man. From the Keweenaw down to St. Joe, Kalamazoo, East to Monroe, to St. Marie and back again. I am a Michigan man. I am